Welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ, and this video is all about books that incorporate mythology. So like I said, this video is all about mythology, but not just Greek mythology. I mean, truly, will we as readers ever get tired of Greek mythology? I can't say. But what I can say is that we're finally seeing more representation of different mythologies and various pantheons, and that is something I can definitely champion. To be honest, I have always personally believed that every nerdy kid has to go through some sort of like uber hyper-focused mythology phase in their youth, right? So my brother went through one, like obsessed with Egyptian mythology for a period. He even made a board game that's fantastically terrible. It's called Egyptian Race, and it's really just a trivia game about who knows the most obscure facts about Egyptian mythology. My point is, I never went through a hyper-focused mythology phase, and I feel like I really missed out. Not Greek mythology, despite the incredible number of Hades and Persephone retellings that I have read over the past 3 years, or Norse mythology, or any kind. I've just never felt drawn to one pantheon over another, and maybe that's why my altar is so cluttered. So with that being said, let's take a look at some of the mythology-based fantasy stories that are out right now, especially in YA. So I personally have not read all of the books on this list, but for the ones that I have not, they are on my TBR. In Hindu mythology, we have Star Daughter by Shveta Thakrar. I read this book a few years ago now, in the fall of 2020, I think, pretty soon after it came out. This book follows Sheetal, who is the daughter of a star and a mortal. But when parts of her accidental starburst puts her father in a coma, she can't save him without the help of a full star, like her mother who returned to the sky a long time ago. So Sheetal actually goes up into the heavens and meets her star family, and there she discovers that the constellations are like family clans, and that there is a huge competition coming up across the entire sky where a representative from each constellation family has to perform, and the winner of this competition will determine which constellation family clan will rule the others for the next generation. So this book weaves modern fantasy storytelling with Hindu mythology, especially when it comes to the celestial bodies in the heavens and the ruling star constellations and their histories. For me, it was the imagery of this book that really sold it more than anything else. So the imagery here, some of the locations, the night market, and some of the really cool aspects are just really, really gorgeous and intriguing. And the heavens are celestial, obviously, but also Thakrar is a really good example of making everything feel really expansive so that at the right moments we really experience kind of those elements of the sublime. So those moments when we feel really, really small, because the cosmos are the cosmos and we are a single human person. So that comes across really well in the story, and it really helped to make all of the settings feel really expansive and rich and important. For African mythology, I have Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. I just read this book last month and I loved it. This book follows Simi, a mamiwata or a divinely created mermaid who travels across the sea and helps ferry the souls of those who die at sea, specifically the humans who were stolen from their homeland during the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. But one day, Simi attempts to ferry the soul of a boy who's just been thrown overboard and discovers that he is still alive. So she disobeys her sworn duty and saves the boy and returns him to his family. But she was created by a god and swore an oath to serve a specific purpose. And by saving this boy, she broke that oath and now has to travel to petition the Supreme Creator for forgiveness. And on her quest, she must also stop a corrupt, power-hungry god who is on the search for these rings of legend which will give him enough power to challenge the Supreme Creator. So the author's note in the back of this book talked about all of the different and various African mythologies that Bowen used to weave her story together, so I'm going to list them below directly from her author's note. Senegalese fairies, an African version of a unicorn, Boltungan shapeshifters of the Kanem-Bornu Empire, and a Ninki-Nanki river monster. And all of this is blended with West African history of the 1400s, right at the beginning of the slave trade. For Mexican mythology, I have Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I think the extent of my knowledge of Mexican mythology, whether it's Mayan or Incan or Aztec, comes almost exclusively from The Road to El Dorado, and that's on me. So I can't speak about this one firsthand because it is still on my TBR. I read Mexican Gothic in the summer of 2020 in like an absolute aggressive blitz without blinking, and then immediately bought everything else that she had written that I could get my hands on. And I haven't quite made it through her backlist yet. This book takes place in the Jazz Age, in which Cassiopeia, who dreams of living a life far away from her small town in southern Mexico, opens a mysterious wooden box in her grandfather's room. This box releases the Mayan god of death, who requests her help in retrieving or recovering his stolen throne, which sounds like there was like a coup with the god's brother. This adventure takes Cassiopeia on a journey through the jungle and into the dazzling city lights of Mexico City, and I think also into like the Mayan underworld, which sounds just so cool. We don't have to spend too much time on this one because it is Greek mythology, and Greek mythology is basically everywhere, but it did feel intentionally exclusionary to not include it, so that's why it's on this list. So Lore is the story of the Aegon, or this like massive manhunt that takes place once every several years or so, and it allows the fallen gods, or the families of the fallen gods, a chance to reclaim their throne. This one was a lot of fun and very violent, which I personally enjoyed, but it was also very Greek mythology heavy. And for someone who got the entirety of their Greek mythology education from the 97 Disney classic, this was just like a lot. For that, it didn't go super broadly into like the entirety of the Greek pantheon, because how could you? But it did keep its focus on just a few of the main characters and their families, and on the story and myth of Medusa, which I did appreciate. For South American mythology, we have The Sun and the Void by Gabriela Romero-LaCruz. So this one just came out, so there really isn't a lot of buzz on it yet, but I did notice that there was a special edition early release copy in one of the book boxes recently. But the blurb is, two women embark on an unforgettable quest that draws them into a world of dark gods and ancient magic in this sweeping fantasy debut inspired by the history and folklore of colonial South America. Anyway, like I said, because it is so new, there's not a ton of reviews out there yet, or even a lot of super specific plot details outside of what I can gather is that it's really just about two women who are involved somehow in forbidden magic. A lot of the blurbs from other authors who have read it and blurbed it have used words like family, longing, betrayal, magic, and even like anguish, which is a choice of a word, so I am intrigued. For Norse mythology, we have Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young. So this book is written by a super popular YA fantasy writer, but to be honest, I have not read this book, or its sequel, obviously, so I'm not actually sure how much Norse mythology takes place in this book. It could just be about Vikings. Like, have you read it? Does it include Norse mythology? Anyway, this book follows Aelin, who is a warrior, and she fights with her clan against an enemy clan. And one day on the battlefield, she sees her brother fighting with the enemy. Her brother, who she watched die 5 years ago. As she has to survive the winter in a neighborhood either surrounded by or like neighboring this enemy clan, Aelin has to make the decision to trust her brother and Fisk, her brother's best friend, and they have to unite and work together or risk everyone being slaughtered. So it seems like this book has the potential to be intense, and I really hope that that's the case and that it isn't a more simplified sort of Viking aesthetic story like Warrior of the Wild by Trisha Levenseller, which I considered to be somewhat of a disappointment. In Chinese mythology, we have Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This one is also still on my TBR, and so shame on me. This book is about Shiori, a princess who possesses a type of forbidden magic, and she's able to conceal it until the day of her betrothal. So she lets her powers loose, and her stepmother, who is also a sorceress, punishes her by banishing her and turning all of her brothers into cranes. But she warns her not to speak a word of this to anyone, or she will kill a crane for every word that she says. Harsh. So now she's alone and broke and voiceless, and she has to both find her brothers and attempt to stop the coup that's being attempted for the throne. Honestly, it sounds like a killer adventure, and I can't wait to pick it up. Honestly, it sounds like a killer adventure, and I can't wait to pick it up. But still, I'm not sure, because I haven't read it, how much Chinese mythology is actually in this one, or if it's more just local folklore and fairy tales, which doesn't make it less than. Personally, I prefer fables and folklore to cultural mythology, but that's just me. But for the purposes of this list, I really did want to include cultural worldwide mythology. So if you've read it, could you let me know if it does include Chinese mythology? And if not, do you have a YA fantasy that does feature it so that I can include it in an updated video? And this last one is a blend of ancient Roman mythology and Middle Eastern mythology, and it's an Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I also have not read this one yet, and sometimes I feel like I am the only booktuber in the world who has not. This book is about Leia, a slave, and Elias, a soldier, in a brutal world inspired by ancient Rome. Leia attempts to serve a rebel group by posing as a spy in the Empire's ruthless military academy, and that launches her on what appears to be a 4-book journey to challenge the oppressive system. But after reading through the synopsis and several different reviews, I am once again, because I have not read it, unclear on how much or if any Eastern mythology is present. So, can you confirm? And in addition to confirming, do you have any recommendations for Middle Eastern mythology inspired YA fantasy? Because that'd be great, and I would really love to read it. So this is a very incomplete list of world mythology and YA fantasy. So this list is incomplete on purpose. I want to keep building it, and I want to keep pulling suggestions and recommendations from you so that this list can grow not just with new book examples, but with new cultures and additional pantheons. So if you have a suggestion or recommendation for this list, please share it below. And then if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you loved it, hit subscribe. And of course, there's always Instagram. But take care, and as always, happy reading.